Howdy folks, Shell Presto DiBaggio here. Today we're going to talk about how important it is to actually do the job you want people to eventually pay you to do before you seek jobs, and also how vital a polished portfolio full of such work is in getting you those jobs. Today on my channel again, I also have ArtAnon again. You may have heard him on a previous video, but I don't think we've ever given him a proper introduction. So ArtAnon, tell people why the heck I have you on my channel.
Well, okay. I think I think you're probably a little bit off to have me on, but that's okay. That's well, I'm also an artist like you shall. So just for a little background, I am a comic book artist. I'm a concept artist. I tend to use traditional techniques, pencil, ink, on paper, Bristol board. I am kind of dipping my toes into digital inking after a number of years. I enjoy creating art for science fiction, pulp revolution, adventure, working with authors who are generating novels in those areas. And ultimately, I am working to get myself into painting book covers, very much like the 50s, 60s, 70s science fiction paperbacks, like the old Avon paperbacks and the pulp magazines. That's kind of my goal in this. I'm a Corel Draw user, so Canadian, over Adobe flavors. I very much like the program. It's number one. Still, you can install it on a desktop and not have to run on a network, because I don't like programs that I have to have a network. That's fraud as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the authors who've used my concept art, Brian Niemeier for his Combat Frame Xseed series, Brad Walker for his Star Knight Saga, Rawle Nyanzi, he's been doing a series of stories called Ladies of Cairo. I've done some art for him on that. And Alexander Hellene in his Swordbringer series, The Last Ancestor, I've done concept art for him.
I'm going to pause right there and say you and I have been collabing on that art. And folks, what you're watching right now is me working on ArtAnon's artwork and coloring it. So
yes, and I apologize, Shell, because yes, in fact, Alex was mentioning that he really liked the work, and that your coloring has really made the artwork pop.
Well, there's actually I did 3 pieces for this, and a future video is going to talk about adapting your coloring style for to match other people's. So this was an interesting experiment, because I was you guys can see me as I'm doing this, but I'm actually coloring to match your previous coloring style on the other Alexander Hellene pieces.
And it's I think an interesting coloring style, because it's very 1960s 4-color comic book coloring. I have no subtlety when it comes to my coloring.
And I'm kind of going somewhere in between there, because you can see I do a lot of essentially fine line and texture work,
yes.
but flat. So I'm actually mimicking your inking, but with the colored lines.
Yeah, the most recent picture, the one you're probably working on right now on the video, that was done, had some wonderful transitional colors. That was just you grabbing a few lines of the inks and shifting colors, and it really made it pop.
Yep, that is the one. This is it Payson or Passon, the dog man?
Payson, yeah.
There we go. But go back to your intro for yourself.
Oh, okay. So a few of the things that I've done recently, I did a city map for Misha Burnett's Bad Dreams and Broken Hearts. I'm working on 2 covers for Carlos Carrasco's One Last Flight, which is already published, and his upcoming book, Faith and Empire. Brian Niemeier just released his Combat Frame Xseed Coalition Year 20 interlude book for his backers. I just saw it on Twitter not 10 minutes ago. I'm working cover design for Brad Walker's Star Knight Saga, his 2nd book, and then I'll also be working their fundraisers for the A Gundam for Us hashtag guys, which is Brian, Brad, and Rawle. Producing some art for an upcoming AD&D clone RPG, as well as a superhero RPG cover from Harbinger Games. And I also do some work for this, really kind of cool property called Ascension Epic. I think you really ought to check them out, Shell.
I think so. Yeah. Oh, wait, I write that stuff. Okay.
Yeah. So I've worked in comics for a while. I did some work for an independent, nationally distributed publisher of superhero comics. I penciled 6 issues or more for them, did a lot of posters and pinups. And then I was a partner in our own company, independent comic book creation publishing company. We had 2 independent titles in national distribution, and I was the penciler and inker on one of those. So currently developing a comic book anthology with a couple of other folks, an excellent artist and a very innovative writer, and hopefully have that for publication in the July-August 2020 timeframe. And other irons in the fire as necessary, I guess.
So I think the major benefit that having ArtAnon on this channel gives to you guys, my loyal viewers, is that 1, he's a little older and therefore a little wiser than me. And 2, he's been doing this a long time and has a lot more experience than I do. As you guys know, I'm, I do jobs here and there professionally, but I don't have as many going as he does, and he does a lot more work for other people. He does a lot more collaboration outside. Ascension Epoch is me and Mike DiBaggio, and a lot of the stuff I do for, say, Bexham's Bazaar, I have creative control over. So ArtAnon has much more experience, say, working with clients, doing designs for other people, and things like that. So, topic today. And this is something that I run into a lot. I used to believe it myself, is that, if you want to be a concept artist, or if you want to be a comic book artist, or if you want to, get a publisher for a book or something you've written even, the idea that you can sell someone the concept that you can do this without ever having shown them that you've done something like that, and that tends not to work.
No, very few people want to hire you or have you provide art, even if it's for free, sight unseen.
And the really big thing is, like, if you say you wanted to work for a big comic book company, or you wanted to pair yourself with an author or something like that, and get a job where people pay you money, which is nice to get paid for your work.
Yes, absolutely.
You have to have a finished product that you've done yourself, that you can show them and say, hey, look, I've done this before. And if you have your full own comic book, like a 12 or 22 page comic book, from start to finish, illustrated in whatever job it is you want to be doing. So if you want to be doing pencils, you have to have a at least 5 pages. The more pages you have, the better, of comic book pencils. If you want inks, you need to ink over someone else's pencils. You need to have a portfolio to show.
Right. And it can be challenging, especially if you are working a 9-to-5 job or longer, 5 or 6 days a week. That can be a real challenge to find that time to generate art. But like anything else, the more you're practicing, the better you're going to get. The more you generate content that you want to produce, the more you get feedback from people who can honestly, or willing to honestly, give you good, constructive feedback. And it may not be the feedback you want to hear, but if it helps you improve, that's what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And well, let's put it this way. Back when you did work for comic book companies, I'm assuming that came after you had your own indie issue out.
Yeah, the only way I could get into the company I worked for was by producing work. I produced I don't even remember how many pages it is, but I produced a full story. I think it was a 14-page story,
Mm-hmm.
and just penciled it all, full final pencils, and said, "Here, what do you think?" I was one of the very, very fortunate ones who was told, "We'll take that as is. We'll get somebody else to ink this, but do you want to do some more?"
Mm-hmm. So they were able to use your sample as well.
Correct. That
Which,
isn't always the case. Um, if you're drawing for an established comic book, uh, characters, they're probably off on an entirely different tangent than you are when you've done your samples, and you should expect that. If you go
mm-hmm.
back to how Marvel and DC did their samples back in the day, I've got a couple of really old um, scripts that Marvel and DC would put out to say, "Hey, do this." One of them was, what was it? A Justice League um, story. So go ahead and draw this Justice League story and show us what you can do, and then send those into samples. So companies will sometimes do that to ask you to show what you can do. Obviously, they're really looking probably more at a penciler when they're doing that. But if you're a penciler and an inker, there's nothing stopping you from saying, "I'm generating full black and white pages and sending these in to the best of my ability."
And that actually goes to, well, before I say that, I will say the only I get paid for my monthly imp strip, but that's once again, I'm fairly established at doing stuff like that at this point. But back in the day when I did the National Grange comic, the entire reason that they let me do that and paid me to do that is because I had a 20-page, and this is really silly because it has nothing to do with it, but Slayer's Dojinji fan comic out.
Right.
Um, and that's actually kind of the joy of your samples or your portfolio. If you're trying to break into Marvel or DC or something, then they're going to want to uh, see their characters, or at least, big, beefy, muscular characters in spandex, because that's what you'd be drawing there. But it still really speaks to you if you have any sample of anything you've done. So, even though it's like, well, I had to do this for free, you can do anything you want. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you can do fan art. You can do, if you want to be able to sell it, you could go back and do a public domain story. Because then you can pop it online and try to sell an e-version of your comic or whatever. um,
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's one of the things to look for as well. I mean, you've hit upon a great item to consider if you're building a portfolio. Make the portfolio do multiple things. I mean, you've said this several times in our private conversations that you want your art to do multiple things for you, and I think that's a great way of approaching artwork, to say that this is a non-exclusive piece. I can use this for this magazine. They're looking for this type of art, and after a period of time, it maybe goes into a collection that you're putting together. Not to say you're going to be selling the same piece of art to multiple people at the same time, but
mm,
you can, if you're not selling the entire an exclusive right to use the artwork, that can become something else in a different venue, and it can always be part of your portfolio.
mm-hmm. And that's a big thing too, is that when you do work for people, the more professional work you do and the more you can prove you can get done on a deadline, the way more attractive you're going to look to people that want to pay you. So
Absolutely.
always try to make sure that if you don't get the rights to reuse artwork, because a lot of work for hire work you can't use again, like you don't own the full copyright on it, even though you made it.
Hmm.
Um, at least try to get the rights to put it in your portfolio, like online, so you can show it to other people or something.
Right.
But those are the big payoff jobs. because anytime you get something done, that's another feather in your cap. And actually, that actually leads into something that you said that I thought was really interesting, because everyone likes to take a dump on Rob Liefeld because,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and it's funny because his art was really iconic at the time, and pretty much anyone that says they didn't, at least like it at the time, I think is lying a little bit, because there's stuff about his artwork that was very high energy, and
Mhm.
um
And
like
still is. And still is if you take a look at some of his new stuff.
yeah, like his artwork often had anatomy issues, and sometimes he went with the feet and hands are hard to draw, so you could tell when he's very obviously obscuring them. But um he did sort of define an era of comics, and there's a reason for that. But you broke into a conversation and had why we should all respect him, and I'll let you take it from there, because I thought it was great and an eye-opening observation.
I think the biggest thing about Rob Liefeld is, as was stated by a number of people that worked with him, he delivered on time. If you told Rob, I need 20 pages in 2 weeks, Rob would deliver you 20 pages in 2 weeks in the condition you requested. He knew how to get work done. As far as I can tell, I haven't tracked down any commentary from people who work with him now, but as far as I know, he's still producing on time as requested in the format that the comic book company or the writer or whomever has hired him has asked him to do.
And I think the really important thing that a lot of people don't realize is that done is way, way, way better than anywhere near perfect.
Yep. Come to the battle with the weapons you have. You will get better. The more you draw, the better you'll become. If you're willing to again take criticism, find appropriate references that are productive for you. Don't be afraid to go back to references. I'm using references all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You can memorize your anatomy. People who do, like Bern Hogarth, I have an incredible amount of respect for them. However, I'm not one of them. I have to keep going back to it. I have to keep reminding myself of that. Don't be ashamed of it. It just is what it is. But if you're working hard, you'll get better. But the frustrating thing is, and I was in this camp too, the assumption is, well, if I just work a little bit harder and do a few more, then I can submit, but just not right now. I just don't want to do something right now that I want to show anybody. I'll just keep working on it.
Mm-hmm,
Well, if you just kind of do your own thing and you never get any further input, your improvement is very likely going to be very slow, very poor.
And that's like the really hard thing of it. It's that you have to be putting things out there, and you're always going to look more professional if you're putting things out there than if you're not, no matter what the quality of your artwork is.
Correct.
Because even if you're I always give the example, if you're finger painting stick figures and holding your comic better together with bubble gum today, and 10 years from now you're doing professional looking stuff, you still get to say, I've been putting stuff out there for 10 years. And that's a huge boon to your reputation. It's okay to learn as you go publicly.
Right. The challenge that people have when they are afraid to put it out there, or get their ego so wrapped up in it that they assume criticism is about them. Again, we're talking about people who are honest in their criticism. If you've asked them to be critical of your art, if you don't want to lose the ego or get your ego bruised, you probably shouldn't do this. You probably shouldn't go into it, because art is really putting yourself out there at some level, or your skill set out there, and asking people, so what do you think? Do you think it's good enough to pay me X number of dollars so you can print this in your comic, your book, your poster, your flyer, whatever it happens to be?
Mm-hmm.
Get over yourself.
And that, I mean, it rots, but you have to swallow it and do it. If you want to do this professionally, there's
Right.
tons of people that want to do it, just for themselves, and that's fine too. But we're obviously talking about people who are hoping to get paid with their artwork.
Right. And I mean, those people who are doing it for themselves and love what they do and never want to take it any farther, boy, more power to you. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing it. Enjoy it.
Yep, exactly. But the conversations with them are obviously shorter because they can be.
Right.
Um, but yeah, and the thing is, you hear these, you hear these stories about, like, Jack Kirby's work was completely fantastic and awesome, and I really can't criticize it, even though, like, if you look hard enough at any artwork, it can be criticized. But
Mhm.
Jack Kirby could get a comic done in a weekend.
Right.
John Byrne, oh gosh, on his X-Men Elsewhen comic that he's doing now, where he's just like penciling it himself. There are entire pages that he penciled in an hour, and that blows my mind.
Right.
Um,
I think we've talked about this one before. I was looking for the reference and I cannot find it. Byrne probably has it on his bulletin board, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, how he got the job at Marvel, or how he was hired by Marvel, was they had an Iron Fist comic that they'd lost their artist. We got no artist, and I don't know how he had contacted them, but it ended up being, if you can get this done for us in a week, you're hired. He got it done for them in a week.
mm-hmm. And that's the other thing too. You need to understand why that is so important to potential employers, is because you may think like, oh, well, I get the pencils done and, that's it. And it's like, well, no, it's like you need to get the pencils done on time so that you can hand it off to an inker and they could get it done on time, and they can hand it off to the letterer and they can get it done on time. Because if you miss the date at the printer has stuff to print tomorrow, and this printer has stuff to print the day after that. So a lot of times, if you miss your deadline with the printer, the book doesn't come out for a month. That's
Well, yeah, and then you move to the next level of the distributor. So if there's some pretty solid fixed dates with the distributor, if you don't hit those wickets, your book isn't out there for another month. It's a month delay before, at least before that book hits the stands, gets to the comic book store, wherever it's going to. Obviously there's more channels that are available to us today than, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago. But you're right. There's all these wickets that you're a cog in that machine for production. If you're doing a comic book, you're a cog in that machine if you're providing art for a book, like cover art, or if you're doing art for an RPG module or a game or something along those lines. You need to know what is your role in the larger process, and you need to accomplish that task that's associated with that role on time. Otherwise, you're messing everybody up.
mm-hmm. And I mean, it happens to all. I'll say it has, not that everyone has been involved in a Kickstarter and putting things out, but on the receiving end of that, how many times have you say back to Kickstarter and it goes into limbo and you're just kind of getting,
yeah.
I'm sorry updates.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah,
and stuff happens, and like sometimes the cogs don't work and stuff like that. And, I can speak from my own perspective and say, we haven't had an Ascension Epoch book out in forever and a day because we had a kid, and that's a major life change, and we're adapting to that. But you know I guess the thing to say with that is that Mike and I are only letting ourselves down on that. You don't want to break a promise to you don't want to break a promise to your readers. You don't want to break a promise to someone else's readers, because then they're not going to hire you again.
exactly.
And you don't want to be the person that is the stuck cog in the whole, production on a promise to someone.
Well, again, let's go back to Kickstarter. I've been involved, or I've backed Kickstarters or Indiegogos where bad things like a family member died.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you understand. Okay, yeah, that's a challenge, and they've got to overcome it. But at the same time, there's been promises made, monies have been collected, and you still have that responsibility. You're going to have to figure out how to get it done regardless. It's just going to be a bigger burden on you that you've got to get that moving forward and keep it moving. So one of the biggest things I see that prompts me to look a little more closely at a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, especially for something like a comic book or a graphic novel or a game, how close are you to having the product completed before you start the Kickstarter and Indiegogo?
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, if I'm going to bring a comic book series to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, I want 3 issues fully completed before I even consider kicking something off.
Mm-hmm.
If you
And
think about the production lead time on 3 issues, yeah, it's a long time. It's a lot of work. But if you're the artist and you have a writer working with you and you can absorb those costs initially, you no longer have to worry about anything other than distribution once the Kickstarter or Indiegogo moves forward.
mm-hmm. And I think that's another thing. Another thing that I look at when I go to Kickstarter is how many Kickstarters has this person done, and how many of those have they fulfilled?
Right.
And that's the same thing that that's the same thing someone looking to give you money is going to be looking at for you. And when they look at your portfolio, when they look at other jobs you've done in the past. The other thing is a lot of people do the thing where they say, oh, well, I'm going to start my comic or maybe get a page or 2 done and everyone looks at Kickstarter as this thing of like, this is how I'm going to pay myself from day one. And it's like, probably no one's going to want to give you money because they don't know if you can do anything.
Right.
So I fully agree with you on the have your product done, then go for it.
Well, the other advantage to having your product done is if you need to do advertising during the Kickstarter or, to the side of the Kickstarter, maybe get some of your friends to get on board with this. Isn't it great to have artwork already done that you can say, hey, let me put another sample page up. Hey, this is what you're getting. Oh, by the way, I've got these posters that I've done that are also part of this series or whatever it happens to be. You've generated everything. It's all ready to go. Again, does it take a lot of work? Yes, it does. But the payoff for that is you look incredible as far as being a professional. You are not being blindsided if you have all of that done and ready to go. Oh, we had a glitch on payment collection. Sorry about that, guys. Guess what? I'm doing a 4-page comic for you, generated out of some of this other artwork. We'll have that ready for you next week.
Mm-hmm.
You suddenly have flexibility that you would not have if you still have to generate everything while the Kickstarter moves forward. And I'm sorry, if you're going to do a 1-month Kickstarter, a 30-day Kickstarter, generating a comic book in that time frame, unless you've had a lot of experience doing it, unless you're a great artist and you're Doug Tenapple fast, ain't going to happen.
I think that brings up a really good point too, is that when you're looking for work with someone, unless you've done the task before, you don't actually know how long it takes you. I've seen people that are like, I've never drawn a comic before. I'm pretty sure I could do a page a day. And it's like,
yeah.
how long does it take you to do? And they'll say something like, I can get a full drawing done in a day. And it's like, well, you realize a comic page is like 6 drawings.
6 full drawings, yes.
Yes. And oftentimes with more background than you do, or with multiple characters. And, you can really only gauge your own abilities once you do something yourself.
Right. Classic one is, let's say you're producing I'll go back to, my experience. let's say you're producing your own comic book and you've got um, a limited number of writers, a limited number of artists, and then you also have to figure out, all right, how do I color a book? How do I letter a book? I'll tell you right now, if you've never lettered before, just generating balloons and generating good-looking balloons is not an easy task. Once you've got a set of about 50 of them, life becomes easier. But if you're starting that off from the get-go and trying to figure out what's a readable font, unless you know where to go, unless you've had some experience with fonts and what a standard comic book font looks like and why it looks that way, why we use capital letters, at least most people use capital letters for comic books. There's a reason for that. You're going to have a real challenge. Just pointing the word balloon tail in the right direction and not getting it crossways with another word balloon is an art form.
Hell, I can't tell you when I first started trying to do comics, and even when I started on Imps, it was really sad because it's like, I've done comics before. Why am I having a hard time with this? Where it's like you just don't leave enough room, and then you're like nudging your art over and ruining your beautiful compositions to try to make room for the words.
Yep. Or you've got to crop the art and push it off into a corner so you can make a blank space in the drawing to accommodate the word balloon.
And then you're like, oh geez, now I had to like touch up the background at the top of the panel, and these are all wonderful things to try yourself and iron out before someone's giving you money. And I think it might even be good to go into the topic of flaking. Like, you have to fight. Well, first off, you have to not flake yourself, which, and I'll even say it, like, artists, myself included, especially when you're starting out, you have a soft ego, and you may you may buckle under the pressure of a deadline. You may feel like your artwork isn't up to snuff and not want to show it to people. And I'll be honest and say, there have been things that when I was a much younger artist, I have totally flaked on people. I said I would do it, and then I didn't. But the thing is, I have never flaked on a job I have been paid for.
Right.
And once people are throwing money at you, you definitely need to not flake on those people. You can get yourself into all sorts of trouble, and your reputation will go downhill way fast if you don't deliver when people have given you money.
Right. And rebuilding that reputation is going to be very difficult. Very difficult.
And like that really highlights the importance of failing on your own terms, because when you're starting out, you're going to fail at things. You may get your full book done or your full story done or whatever you want to do for yourself, but it might take you 4 times as long as you planned. And that's okay when you're just doing it for yourself, or you're doing it for free, or I mean, if you're, say, working with a friend or something, it's obviously going to stress the friendship if you tell them you could do it by this date. But if there's no money involved, you might be able to fix things. But
right.
If there's money involved, you're not going to fix that.
Yeah, it can be a huge challenge to make that happen. Yes, I don't think I've got anything more to say on that one. Don't do that.
Yes. And it's very bizarre because you see it a lot, and one of the reasons you have to have a portfolio to show, a finished product to show before people will give you money to draw, is because there are a lot of people that flake. We pay people to do other art for Ascension Epoch. I'm not always the only Ascension Epoch artist. There's people we've paid, and we never give a full payment in advance unless we've worked with the person before. And the reason we do that is because sometimes they'll even show you the drawing like 80% done, and they never finish it. And it's like, I can't give you $70 for this, not knowing if I'm going to get it or not. And as artists, we have to essentially make up for other people's bad reputations, because there's lots of people that are like, I would love to, hire an artist and pay them X amount per drawing. And, even if I love their artwork, you see it a lot on actually with people doing RPG books and stuff like that. The authors of these books, and they're like, but there have been so many times that I paid someone and I just never got anything.
Right.
So, and you have to watch out on that both ways, because, sometimes you're the artist and you get the work done and you don't get paid. So I always ask for a small down payment in advance personally. And I don't deliver the full size final image until I get paid for it. Because so if you deliver the full size final artwork to people before you're paid, sometimes they just take it and never pay you. And that's another entirely different issue.
Right. And that's where you have to kind of say, if you're working with somebody new, it's kind of a give and take on both sides. It's like, okay, well, small down payment, got it. Provide a couple of pieces of art along the way, or like stages of the drawing. Hey, here's where I am in my rough pencils. Just want to let you know what we're doing. I'm looking at about another 2 days to get to finished pencils. Okay, great. Send me the finished pencil drawing when you're done. Okay, great. Hey, it's looking good. Maybe that's another small payment that comes forward on that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it really depends on how you're going to work with the client and what level of trust you've built up. But let's say that you've been working with several clients, and the reason that person's coming to you is, hey, I saw the work you were doing with this person, and I contacted them. They said, you were really good. You're on time. When you had something that needed to be changed, that was minor, it was like no problem. You just changed it. Made sure that you knew what the client was looking for. You kind of went into detail about, let me get what you really want here. So I'm capturing your vision of this, so I can translate your vision in words into vision in pictures. Once you start building up a clientele like that, where they can say, I've worked with him, I like him, I work with him, I trust him, I work with him, I'll work with him again. Mm-hmm. It becomes much easier to work with someone and say, hey, I need X amount down, and here's what I'll provide you. And it'll be easy negotiations in many cases, because that word of mouth, if you've built up a good reputation with other people, if you've produced for other people, you've delivered for them, word of mouth does an incredible amount of work for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always use Alex Ross as my example, but no one's, thinking twice about, giving Alex Ross a firm down payment,
Right.
Once you have that reputation, you have that reputation. That's the joyous thing about it. And once you have that reputation, people actually are understanding if an actual, problem happens. If your great grandmother dies every other week, no one's going to cut you any slack whatsoever the next time your great grandmother dies. It's like, wait, how many great grandmothers do you have? But if a real emergency hits and you have a good reputation and you work hard to get back on the horse after you get hit with something, it's a lot easier to mend any deadlines you've missed or anything like that. But the other thing is you have to be honest. This is a big thing. This is another big point about professionalism is keep people informed. Even if you're a person that gets stuff done on deadline, if you have, if your deadline is 6 months from now, or your deadline is 3 months from now or whatever, and you don't, say, hey, I've got this stuff done for you until the day before the deadline, you're gonna have your clients biting their nails. If you send them little updates, if you say, even if you don't have something to show, like, right now I'm working with someone and I'm doing a script for someone. And, I just send a note every couple of days saying, because there's times when I have a script and it's a complete mess and, I have it written, but it's not ready to show. It needs a little polish. I send a note every couple of days saying, hey, look, I've got 16 pages of this thing done. So I'll be sending you a more complete finished script, but I need a couple days to polish it. Just keep the communication flowing, send your blue line sketches, send, if it's been a little while since you've communicated, people like the little check-in. Even if they don't respond back to you, that's still a boon to you to let them know that you're making progress.
Right. What I will say, though, is make sure you've got a good communication line. It's been a little bit, but was working an image for somebody, and I was sending information to them, and I was getting bounce backs on their email. I thought, well, it sounds a little bit strange, but let me go over to the other email. Well, it turns out the other email was secondary, but they had given me the initial email, and I'd found the second email and said, oh, well, he's got two of them. Great, I've got a backup. So I decided to use the backup, but I never checked with the individual to say, is this a good backup? So now we get down to being close. I think I've been delivering updates, but the updates haven't been going to either email address. So client was a little bit upset, saying, it's a little bit late getting me this. We're getting down to the wire. And, I just said, yep, absolutely, completely my fault. So that's where it was just my fault. I should not have assumed that one or both emails were functional. Challenging, if that's the only contact information you've got, but don't assume that information is going through if you're not hearing from the client or your collaborators. Make sure you've got good communication, if at all possible, and you're absolutely right. Don't blindside the boss. Make sure that communication is flowing, even if it's, hey, I haven't got a lot of it done here. If you want a scan of this, I can get it to you. I'm planning on still meeting that next time hack that I've got for next week. I'll be ready to give you the material at this stage at that point in time. Even a quick email like that, or a text, or whatever it happens to be, and then a confirmation. And I know sometimes that's not easy, is making sure that communication is two-way, but wherever you can make it two-way, it is just so much easier to work with the client.
I have actually, in my professional contracts, when I'm doing a big contract with someone, I actually have a clause in there that says they need to get back to me within X number of days if they want me to hit the deadline.
That's a great reminder, especially if you're making them sign it and say, hey, I need you to read everything here and make sure you're okay with it.
I do that because it can totally happen where, you're in a good situation and you're going to get paid for this job, and the money is reliable, but they just don't give you the final okay. Like,
right.
if the deadline is in 2 weeks and you're like, oh man, I've got 2 weeks to finish this, and then you send them the blue line sketch and you don't hear back from them for 12 days, then all of a sudden you're screwed. You have 2 days to finish what you had thought you had 2 weeks to do, and that's just bad for everyone. So I actually do put a clause in if I'm doing a larger project that says I need to hear back from you within, I forget if it's 2 days or 4 days, whenever I need confirmation on it.
Right. No, I think that's a great idea to make sure that's part of the contractual arrangement. If you're doing a contract, you might as well put that in there, that we need to be talking to each other. So when you're signing the contract, it's like, I'm agreeing to this as well, just like the client is. So I need to be the one who's proactively working it. Going back to what you're talking about with having that 2 weeks, this was, I think, kind of a sea change in my thinking too, because I this is a while ago, but I would think, oh, I've got 2 weeks. This is going to be plenty. I got plenty of time to do this. That's a really poor way of approaching commercial artwork. You should be looking at that as, I've got 2 weeks. I can get it done in 3 days. Let me get it done in the next 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
So if something needs to be redone, I'll have time to do it. If something comes up, if there is oh my gosh, should have been a mirror reflection and needs to be facing left instead of right, what are you going to do with it? Is it something that you take into your graphics program and you can make that happen? Or do you have to do a full redraw? That might be the solution. The advantage of thinking that way too is suddenly you've got a lot more time to do projects or do other stuff. If you've got to go clean the house, you've got time to do that. But putting off completing a project rarely is beneficial.
Well, that's also, when you're like, oh, I've got 3 days. If you have 2 weeks to do it and it takes you 3 days to do, then that guarantees that if you plan to do it on the last 3 days, then 3 days from your deadline, your dog's going to get horribly sick, or you're going to get a cold,
or that meteor strike will happen.
Right. And somehow, your house and your publisher's house is going to survive it, but everything in between is, you're going to be dusting meteor things off your house, or there's going to be rain coming in on your drawing table.
Yep. It's never good. It's just better to, I guess we can say this, really, it's for just about anything that you do. You got a task in front of you, tackle it. I know I've got somebody at home who is more than happy to tell me that, because I can be someone who will just kick their feet up. So it's always good to be reminded. And if you've got that problem, get somebody to give you a poke in the ribs, and don't take it as a personal insult. It's like, you know what, they're right. If I'm slacking, you're right. And it really has been a benefit over time having someone who cares about whether you're succeeding or not.
Well, yes, that too. But actually, that could be a topic for its whole own other video on deadlines and working to deadlines.
Right.
All right, so I'm going to say I think we covered this topic pretty well. With the big takeaway from the whole thing is just, while you have the opportunity to build your portfolio on your own time without involving other people or money, you should take that learning experience and you should do it, and you should be putting your artwork out there, because building your own reputation is how you're going to get people to eventually give you money to do artwork for them.
Concur.
So, all right, folks, I'll call that it for a day. Shell, Presto, and ArtAnon over and out.
of space.